I've been talking about spirituality a lot, and I want to just review real quick that the soul or our essence is our most precious possession, if you want to call it that. And we can experience that soul when we experience pure joy. Joy is the essence of who we are. And love is kind of the fuel, if you like. And really, we don't need to know a lot more. And there's a lot, as I've said in many different videos, there's a lot connected with that. But let's put that aside for the moment. Our problem, and many people's problem, is that we exist in a culture. This culture does not like spirituality. Not that it has, some guy at the top says, "Oh no, we can't have." It's just the ethic of late state, what you can call late stage capitalism, which is what we live under in the West, is is completely opposed to other value systems because that's the way value systems are. When the church was dominant, let's say in the Middle Ages and quite a while afterwards, the ethics that were produced by the teachings of the church were foremost in people's minds, for better or for worse. And I'm not saying it's a bad thing or a good thing. It's just the way it was. That ethic was real. It existed and last persisted and persists in little ways even now in our moral framework of loving your enemies and all those kind of ideas. We don't traditionally in the West think that people are at least in, let's say, modern times, that people who have different cultures are not human and can be slaughtered at will. And we have a few countries like Israel who has no compulsion about slaughtering non-Israelis or non-Jews because it believes that Jews are superior human beings. In fact, the other people are just cattle. That's what goyim means. So there are people who still think in the old way, because the way Israel thinks is the way people thought centuries ago. They're they go medieval, right? So that's how they think. And it's not necessarily wrong. If you're an Israeli, if you're a Jew, obviously you want to have a coherent culture. Well, in the same way, we in the West, I don't consider Israel part of the West, by the way. We in the West believe that each person has dignity, whether they are Protestant, Catholic, Jewish, Islamic, Buddhist, Taoist, Hindu, whatever. Each person has worth in themselves. This idea that actually came from, I believe, from Christianity has lingered in our culture. So even though our culture is very materialistic, these kinds of ideas persist and even blossom to some extent in the United States, as we've seen the dramatic changes in opinion you know, between different groups. We've seen the civil rights era, which gave Black people who were considered subhuman in by many people back in the day. I still remember what racism was like growing up in the 50s. But even then, it was changing. The intellectual class, the people who had better education, they tended to see them as human beings, and they were in part they joined into the civil rights movement. Uh, and I'm including Jews here because Jews were at the heart of the civil rights movement, just so people understand. They were at the heart. They took a lot of chances. And I've talked to a few of them, veterans of that era many years ago, and they were deeply passionate. Anyway, this idea that gay people who like members of their own sex, which runs totally contrary to Old Testament teachings, um, they were began to be accepted in the 70s as part of society. So by the 90s and aughts, they actually were able to marry. So we had that evolving culture which said that all people have worth. Now, the fact is that as we moved away from religion, we also gave spirituality less importance, even though underneath the ethic of everybody having have that everybody has human dignity, no matter their color or their culture or their religion. Underneath that are spiritual principles of religion, and not just Christianity, but also exist in Islam, and certainly Buddhism, Taoism, and all the rest. So these ideas um, that have come to us as a kind of a river flowing through this highly materialistic, very successful culture. I mean, we had until 1900 always less than a billion people. Excuse me, 1800. It was in 1800, in the 1800s, that that industrialization, scientific ideas, using logic rather than scripture to run our lives, there was a great blossoming, a flowering of human culture all over the world, not just in the West, but all over the world. So we had mass industrialization provided us with products, with unbelievable products. If you know, if you were born in the 1700s, you couldn't have imagined it. Anyway, so we have all, it was highly successful. So the narrow materialistic ideas that came to us and that founded the country, really, because we are a result of the Age of Enlightenment in the 18th century. So our founders were deeply steeped into that, and some of them were also steeped into the morality of Christianity without necessarily the dogma of Christianity. If you look in the works of Thomas Jefferson, he's sort of like archetypal in his views of religion versus cult versus philosophy, and then so on and so forth. So there was a part of him that was religious, but it was not the narrow religious ideas of the various churches and that still exist in the United States, and particularly with evangelical Christianity. But anyway, narrow versions of Christianity began to fall away and were revived artificially. But if you take the average evangelical Christian, many I live in the South, so they're all around me. They're just as materialistic, if not more materialistic, than atheists in New York City, right? It's a remarkable thing how they can do that, how they can twist Jesus into marketing and all kinds of things. I mean, it's an amazing thing, but they need that Bible, what they call the Bible, which they seldom read really, that is a sort of solid structure. And I think in their defense, we all need that solid structure. It's kind of absurd to go through life with like, oh, everything's changing. We're progress. We 50 years ago, we had TV was amazing, right? And then computers, in the 1980s and 90s, computers, oh my God. And then the internet, in late 90s, mid to late 90s, it's even more crazy. Look at the advancements, and how can we go back to the old way of doing things? We've got these phones. How can we go back to the old way of doing things? You know, young children teachers are reporting that children say, well, why do we have to learn this? We can just ask the AI. Of course. Well, anyway, this growth in technology is absolutely spectacular and has increased our lifespans, has increased our ability to handle problems. Almost everything that you can think of every problem has a solution. The problem is that culture hasn't really advanced. In other words, instead of solving these problems like disputes between, say, Ukraine and Russia, or the United States and Iran, we could solve those problems through a developing field, which I've known a few people in it, of conflict resolution. It's like it's win-win or partial win-win. You can solve these problems, and just solving it through using military force is absurd. It's destructive. Rather than it's like our progress that we've had for since really the hundreds of years, two couple of centuries of progress is now stalled. The technology continues, but the well-being of human beings has declined in the United States, certainly, and increasingly in Europe. So what's happened is that the people who control this amazing machine of modern technology are taking more and more for themselves because they lack any kind of ultimate purpose other than materialism. For them, God does not exist. Or if it exists as a God that only serves them and their people. And so we're stuck with these ravenous beasts, atheist beasts, fundamentally, from a Christian or Islamic or even Jewish point of view. The people who are on top of our society are without any sense of spirituality at all. They want to grab everything. And they have. That's what they're doing right now. And they've been doing it since the 1980s. Statistically, that's when the income gap began was in the 80s. And so the richest of the richer you are, the higher the level of growth in your income. If you're just middle class, it was very slight rise. And recently it's not rising anymore. And if you're poor, things are worse. In some ways, more dependent, people become more dependent on increasingly small amounts of government largesse. So here we are. We are badly in need of a new conceptual framework, a new moral structure, because the old ones have been thrown out through progress, really. I mean, and rightly so. The old Protestantism and Catholicism, narrow-minded Catholicism, which which came as a answer or a reaction to the Protestant Reformation in the church, the Roman Church. It's called the Counter Reformation. Began to narrow its collective mind again, and so both of these religions, even though they didn't fight anymore after the 30 Years' War in the 17th century, now they just kind of growl at each other periodically because most people, whether they're Catholic or Protestant or evangelical, which I consider a separate religion, I don't consider them Christians really in the gospel sense. In my experience, just what I observe, they uh, they may accept these religious ideas from Protestantism or Catholicism or evangelical Protestantism, but they live their lives as if there was no such thing, as if Jesus never lived. They use Jesus as being saved personally, so they don't have to worry about anything. And the evangelicals, the Protestants just try to live a good life or whatever they think, and it's not that important what Jesus taught. They don't take that to heart, so they're easily led into war. So, oh, those Iranians, they're crazy, so let's kill them. Well, people seem to accept that, although I think that's less the case now. Or the Russians. The Russians are bad. They're I don't know, whatever it is. They have this mindset that was created by the mind control programs that existed that have built up since World War II in the United States. Because while technology in terms of making computers, TVs, cars, etc., has increased and has given us a lot of benefits, at the same time, mind control regimes a lot of them came from the Nazi period. A lot of Nazis who were part of the Holocaust and were part of the mind control system there emigrated to the United States under something called Operation Paperclip. So they took these people and put them into various places. Space program was the most dramatic, obviously obvious one, but other areas, CIA, MK Ultra, and all these other programs to create altered human beings that would do whatever you wanted them to do. That's another whole big story. And you can look up MK Ultra if you want to find out more about it. It's on the internet, and you know, there's a lot to it. I'm not going to get into that, but it's a technology that evolved just as much as physical things, uh, computers, chips, everything like that. They all had were technological advances. Well, in the same way, mind control or controlling populations and propaganda developed in the same way. These techniques became very advanced. And today, the problem with finding spirituality in ourselves is that we're subject to this, first of all, this level of ideology that says, well, any problem that exists we can solve through technology. Okay. Yes, that is in fact true, but it's technology that is controlled by an upper class or a ruling class that is does not have your interests in heart at all, not even a little bit. So for the most part, I mean, there are people in the ruling class, in government, et cetera, that do have some consideration, but the main consideration is power for the powerful and control of the population, whether it be here or elsewhere. And so everywhere that sort of started out after World War II is saying, well, now we should use reason and we should use sort of humanitarian ideas of helping others. And if there's a famine and we're going to give them as much grain as they can handle and la, 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 all these humanitarian ideas, which were a result of the underlying Christian ideals, they began to flourish and people really felt that way. Americans wanted to save the world. They wanted to be the model of the world. Democracy and the Republic of the United States as constructed was very remarkable. We had a constitution, we were a republic, we had democratic institutions. Notice we had some democratic institutions. We never really were a democracy per se. We were always have been a republic, which is a combination of input from the people and input from the elites. And we somehow balance it out, very much as Rome did in the Republic era, in their republic. It was very similar and it was constructed under similar lines. But these ideas have now changed because the ruling elites no longer had the morality that the ruling elites had in the past. Not that everybody was good and selfless, in 100 years ago. That's not true. But more, it was closer to being uh, um, selfless than it is now. Now the ruling elites are not in government. Governments just serve them. So if you're the president or if you're a congressman or senator, you serve, you know, the big financial organizations like BlackRock. So and two or three other ones that control everything, control all the corporations, who control the money that goes into politics. Anyway, it wasn't that way even 50 years ago. It started really around that, maybe 50 years ago, gradually. So we live in a different world. And so we have to understand that this world that we live in today is not conducive to spirituality. And so we have to operate in a way that's apart from that. Somebody wrote a book, I can't remember his name, called The Benedictine Option, which was talking about Christianity moving away from the morality of the marketplace, of materialism, et cetera, et cetera. I think we're entering into that era. And I think that the people who are spiritual need to live apart from the mainstream of society in order to preserve that and to continue the process and the progress we've made spiritually. Again, by accepting other people as having dignity, as accepting other religions as having some validity, without necessarily eliminating our religion. So my religion is real Christianity, based on the Gospels. Other people have different ideas and different cultures. They've been raised differently, and that's fine. So this growth of parts of spirituality are with us, and so now we need to carry on the inner part so that we can move away from this control mechanism, which is now stifling, actually even stifling material growth. So more and more people are becoming impoverished in the sense of paycheck to paycheck, if they can do that. Uh, we're having all kinds of economic problems, which are going to only increase. So I'm just urging that people get together and start forming associations, networks that can eventually move into communities. And we can't do it online. It doesn't work that way because we need to establish trust. And we only can establish trust person to person interaction. So that's all I have for today. Thank you.